Thanks for joining us back promptly. I'm really excited about our next panel. We tried to put together a panel that would give us a little bit of background and lessons learned from those who've gone through the testing program, specifically content testing, but some of them will speak a little bit about the transport testing and so forth. This panel is called Ace the Test, and I'm happy to have our three panelists here. I'm going to go ahead and go through their bios, give them a little bit of background so you'll know who they are. Interestingly, they'll meet you hopefully over lunch. After the session, I know we're the only thing really standing between you and lunch. So please let you know that lunch will be back in the main atrium area, right in front of what's called the Cherry Blossom Ballroom. So it's in the main atrium area, there's an open area, and there'll people along the way to kind of guide you and tell you where to turn. So everyone will be kind of self-herding yourself down through there, and there'll be a buffet lunch for you. So our first panelist's name is John Henry Downing. He's from Zen Consulting, and he's part of a team that provides the on-demand interoperability engineering support for the health information exchanges that are their customers and healthcare organizations across the United States. Thank you for advancing. The eHealth Exchange and Care Quality Initiatives are both what he has experience with, and he has 5 years of experience in working directly with these healthcare organizations as an analyst and an engineer. His role's really been trying to lead the eHealth Exchange and Care Quality implementations at Zen while he's trying to also provide subject matter expertise. And I'm very happy to say he's actually helped us to even debug some of our tooling along the way. Our second speaker is Alan. He's a specialist from Deloitte Consulting, Life Sciences and Healthcare Consulting Practice. He has over 20 years of experience in enterprise integration, enterprise architecture, data architecture, development, and infrastructure. He's helped a variety of providers performing in a deeply technical and advisory role, developing their enterprise architecture and creating innovative technology and strategies. And our last panelist is Sandy Mitchell. She's with JP Systems, a contractor for the Veterans Health Administration, specifically working on data quality improvement around the Veterans Health Information Exchange. She is a pharmacist by training with over 30 years of experience in health IT. She's a veteran, including leading the development and implementation projects into production. She's effectively bridged the communication gap between clinicians and the IT technologies needed to really translate that into optimal patient care, so really working on the data quality. She understands the importance of having real-time quality data at the clinician's fingertips. And I'm really happy to see the progress she's helping make, having family members who are veterans myself. So those are our panelists. I'm going to go ahead and get us started, kind of getting us a little background of how we got here, where we've come along the way, why are we doing content testing and so forth. So my name's Dee Dee Davis. I'm the Vice President for Informatics, Conformance, and Interoperability, meaning I wear many hats. I do represent us at the Standards Development Organizations, HL7, IHE. I have leadership positions in both. I am helping to provide that feedback loop back to the SDOs from those lessons learned. So any of the testing that we do, if we find specification ambiguities, improvements that could be made, I try to give them that feedback loop so that we can continue improving these specs, because if we don't have anything to test people against, we can't help them improve. But it is an incremental process. So today's agenda is really going to cover a couple of things, not only the overview of the content testing program itself, but also making sure to kind of lessons learned from each of the panelists. Each of them have some slides we'll go through, and then at the end of the session we'll have a Q&A. So each panelist will have about 10 minutes to talk, and then we'll have open up at the end of the session at least 15 minutes or so probably for Q&A. So how did we get here? Believe it or not, we've been trying to improve data quality since 2015. I was asked by our leadership at the time, the coordinating committee, who self-governs the eHealth Exchange, that there needed to be an improvement to quality of the content being exchanged. So in the early days, when I first took on the testing program back in 2014, we kind of waved the hand. Anybody who had already gone through meaningful use or had a vendor implemented in their architecture that had gone through meaningful use for the 2011 edition, 2014, or 2015 edition. We kind of waved the hand if we could find their vendor in the chapel. We said there was no testing, no additional testing needed. Well, we focused on transport and trying to get that part done. We did that well, but we started finding that even though people were meaningful use certified, that didn't mean that their data quality implemented at the customer sites matched what they certified. So we started looking at ways to improve that. So we launched a testing work group in June of 2015. And at that point, we started kind of talking. We had 2 co-chairs at the time who helped the leadership of it, and we had really great attendance. And for the first 6 months, we really tried to think of what do we need to do in the way of improving content? What are the pain points? What are the issues we're having? What do we need to do? At the end of those 6 months, we really found that what we needed to do was really try it out and initiate a testing program. We all agreed we needed to do testing. We were willing to do testing to make each other accountable to that, but we really wanted to take and find what would be the right testing tool, what would be the right specifications to test against, and so forth. During the testing work group, we found everybody was already focused on meaningful use. That was really what the biggest focus was on. So we started with that. And moving to April, July timeframe, we did a lot of scoring of all the tools. Believe it or not, there were 4 different content testing tools at the time, and we didn't know how they worked or how well they worked, so we did some scoring in January of 2016, trying to figure out what might be something we want to pilot. We started a pilot April through June of 2016, ran it with 20 organizations, giving us 45 different sample documents, representing about 10 different electronic health records. Those documents were run through all of the different tools to see how they performed and how they, really identified the errors and issues that were within the content itself. Believe it or not, at that point in time, we put together a full write-up, gave all of our coordinating committee kind of a recommendation of what we thought we needed to do, at least from a testing work group perspective. And in November of 2016, we actually took and put it before the coordinating committee for approval. They, at that point in time, started what we call our formal change management process to go through the 30-day notice for participants to make sure they didn't have a way to object, because you can say, no, I don't want to do this. There were no objections. Everyone felt, yes, we need to do this. And in January 2017, we actually made what was going to be tested requirements effective. Now, it took us another year to actually implement the tools and the actual program. And why do you say it take us a year? Because I had to work with HL7, and I had to work with ONC, and I had to make sure that the errata that had been processed or that had been put forward on the 2015 edition of Meaningful Use and the 2.1 specification of HL7 CCDA, there were hundreds of errata items that had never been processed. So the documentation didn't match what problems really had been identified already in it. So we started working and saying, hey, these things need to be processed, and there needed to be vocabularies and value sets. Because if I'm going to do testing, I'm going to make everyone test the same way, but really holding them accountable. And without the value sets, some of the semantic interoperability wasn't possible. So it took us a year to get that part done, but we worked with, and thankful to HL7, the National Library of Medicine, part of NIH, and the Value Set Authority Center, finally published the value sets. February 1st, the value sets were finally published, so we went live with our program February the 5th. That did give me time to work with the tooling vendor to get the tooling up to speed and do some beta testing with it as well. So fast forward, as of February 5th of this year, we actually launched the content testing program and went live with it. And we're continually improving the content standard. We've already given them back 5 or 6 different erratum, and we've actually improved the value set. The first value sets that were released in February, we found bugs in because of the testing, and we put another release of the value sets out in June of this year. So we're already seeing feedback loops going forward. So I'm going to not steal thunder from John. He's going to be able to tell you the acronym he came up for these. But the pain points we really wanted to focus on were terminology, the specification ambiguity itself, the complexity of those standards, because believe it or not, it's hard sometimes. I mean, not only the implementers, you as health information exchanges, your staff may not know what you don't know, but having actual, people helping you understand what the errors mean, working with your vendors and so forth. So the complexity we've been finding as an important piece of this. And then the optionality. Whenever there's optionality, like the CCD specification, everybody for meaningful use, vendors always took the easy way out. And I was a vendor for 16 years, so I'm not picking on vendors. But when meaningful use came out, it was like, let's squish everything into a continuity of care document. What about history and physical? What about a discharge summary? What about a referral note? All these different types of notes have different reasons for existence. So we wanted to make sure that we start working with vendors to help remove some of that optionality. So we launched the testing program with a tool that was the first component of what we now have called the Sequoia Interoperability Testing Platform. The content testing was launched in February. We launched the RSNA program updates in June, and then we launched the transport testing components of that in July of this year. So now the full Sequoia ITP, yes, it's another acronym, sorry, but Interoperability Testing Platform just is too long to roll off the mouth. So Sequoia ITP was launched and the content testing started at that point. It does cover all the versions of the specs. I know ONC really has deprecated the C32. Believe it or not, that's not allowed for meaningful use attestation officially. But we do have it in the wild, and a lot of people only support that still. So we had to make sure that the testing program covered all the above. We did choose tooling from IHE, Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise, which actually celebrates its birthday this month. This month they are 20 years old. So we actually worked with IHE Services to make the tools do the U.S. components with all of the errata and the companion guides that are part of the meaningful use specifications. The production and participants that are already in production, as well as those that are newly onboarding, and any product vendors who want to be validated, as we call it, must pass content testing, or at least try, not saying pass. They must at least attempt testing between now and February 5th of 2019. So we've given them all a year to get the testing done at one point or another. You don't have to pass. In fact, we've only had 3 organizations pass to date, and they're listed on the slide. I did give them kudos because there's 3 that have passed, and they deserve that. At the participant webpage for all the participants for the eHealth Exchange website, which is hyperlinked on the slide here, we actually, as those organizations pass the content with passing grades, they will have this icon called Content Access beside their organizational names. We are providing SME help, the subject matter expertise, to help interpret the errors, working with vendors, and then working with some of our integrators that are part of this panel to help them help their customers as they go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to start his presentation part.
Alrighty, so just to dive right into it, as Dee Dee alluded to, sorry, too far, not far enough? Okay. As Dee Dee alluded to, the eHealth Exchange initiative, as it's been adopted over the last many years, has done a great job. All kinds of folks have been laying the pipes to get connected to each other. That was the driver. Let's do it. Let's get, quote unquote, the data. Let's get stuff flowing through those pipes. Well, for a long time, people weren't really looking at what stuff was actually flowing through those pipes. And on occasion, as we're now finding out, more and more issues with, well, it's not fresh water in these pipes, it's actually, garbage, gray water, something like that. We don't want that in our freshwater pipes. So that's where this testing comes in. I'm pushing the button, I promise. Okay. So the acronym for some of these issues, to recap really quickly: TACO problems, terminology, ambiguity, complexity, and optionality. I should have that memorized, but I don't. Good example of each, just to put into a little bit of English, is terminology. You're sending me your local codes. I don't have your local codes. All of this is meaningless. Please help make it something that everybody understands, or at least I understand. Ambiguity. Which ID element means what again? This happens a lot in many of the sections in a CCDA, for example. Complexity. What is the scoping entity of your participant's participant role? What does that mean? I don't really know what I just said. That can be a real issue for some folks. Do you need a PhD in how CCDAs are built in order to interoperate with everybody? The answer a lot of times so far has been yes. Do we want that to be the answer? I don't think so. Optionality, my personal favorite. Spec says should. I coded my CDR or what have you, expecting this because spec says should. You read should as, I can do it if I want to, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to error because I'm expecting it, you're going to complain because you didn't code it. Who wins? You wind up with vendor islands in a way this way, where different vendors can integrate amongst themselves, but can't integrate across each other very easily. Interoperate is probably a better word to use. So let's look at the tool that's meant to help address some of these issues. The eHealth Exchange ITP, one component of the ITP now is content testing. The goal of which is to settle a bunch of these ambiguities. Hey, let's all agree on one standard. I know we've all heard this before all over the place, but this time we have some muscle behind it. Let's agree on one standard and let's test everybody to make sure that that's actually what they're doing instead of just, hey, we're all saying we're doing this. So here's the tool. I'm going to walk us through the just nuts and bolts of using the tool. I'm going to show a couple of examples, and I'm going to stop saying because you're not supposed to do that. So first things first, you get access to the Sequoia ITP content testing tool by asking for it. Shoot an email off to the admin at Sequoia Project, admin at eHealth Exchange to get access, get your login. And you submit individual CCDAs by hand at the moment. You get a sample, non-PHI sample of a representative document of what you're going to be exchanging on the exchange. This can be many documents if you're exchanging different types, different versions. If you have different participants, you're going to be exchanging their documents wholesale over the exchange. Well, you need one from each participant. We can save those details maybe for the Q&A because it gets a little bit tricky. But essentially, you tell the validator, hey, I'm sending you, in this case, a CCDA revision 2.1 for my sample here. And I'm going to walk you through. This is one page, but it's too big to put on the screen. So at the top, you have some features and functions for accessibility. This, as an implementer, is gold because this lets me share the findings, which we'll get to in a moment, within my team and outside of my team very easily. Part of the reason it's important for no PHI, but the beauty here is there's a link right there. I can copy and paste that into Slack, HipChat, email, what have you, and share, hey, source, we're seeing all of these issues with your CCDA. Instead of me trying to just transcribe this into an email, here's the actual results, click, 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 and I'll show you how they can do that. Scroll down a little bit, and you see some of the first feedback. In this case, I passed them both. You don't see a lot of issues out here in the well-formedness and the schema validation, but this will be things like, we'll actually get into it in a moment, you're missing an element or you have a hanging bracket or something like that. But the real meat and potatoes a lot of the times comes in the object checker. Scroll down a little bit further. Here you see the specific tests enumerated and called out for everything that was checked, what passed, what failed, and if you see highlighted in red on the, I think your right, yes, is the little eyeball button. My favorite button of the entire tool. This will drop you right down into the CCDA to the line you're looking at that's complaining about what the issue is, with some feedback in line saying this should be this. I'll have an example of that in a moment. So what are some of the observations I've had with the tool so far? Pretty much every time you start a new data quality project or assessing somebody, the CCDAs will fail the first time. C32s do. Will fail the first time, sometimes with hundreds if not thousands of errors. Sounds horrifying, run, let's all just quit. No, it's tolerable, it's manageable. Every single error is enumerated individually. So I have an example up here. This was a very good CCDA. It had over 700 errors. I didn't panic though because I realized that about 600 of those were all of one type. It was complaining, oh, all your IDs need to be capitalized. One little tweak, boom, 600 of those errors solved, took 15 minutes. Don't panic. The tool has a great UI, making collaboration across technical folks and more managerial types very easy. And also, one thing I like to point out is the tool's new. There can be issues with it. Zen reported one of these earlier this year where, hey, you need to have content from a given code set. I swear I have it from that code set. What am I missing? Oh, John, you're not going crazy. Don't worry. You're just tearing your hair out for no reason. Little bug in the tool, and they fixed it. So it was excellent. So what I wanted to do is just dive in really quickly into a real-world problem. This is from a functional status of a revision 1.1 CCDA. The takeaways here is there's two different issues. There's one that I like to call the letter of the law issue, and one that's a spirit of the law issue. Letter of the law is how the content testing works today. Spirit is how maybe a direction we're going to be moving towards. So, functional status, narrative block, as many of you may be familiar, saying this individual needs assistance feeding themselves. In the coded entry, we actually see that not a whole lot of information. The code is empty, and the value down there, which is saying what's actually happening here, is basically saying I don't have any information. Common issue, you see this all the time out in the field. So first thing first, code. Code's empty. How did I find that out? Or how did I find that out as a problem with the content? Here's some of the output from the tool. When I click on the eyeball next to the issue in the output at the top, it brings me down into the line saying a couple different reasons why. This can't be empty, that can't be empty, that can't be empty, and in fact, you should have a code from this value set. Easy as pie, in a way. Let's look at, well, maybe what should this code be? In that case, what value, should it be from a value set? Should it be something specific? You start with the CCDA spec. So I pull up my 500 pages of CCDA spec, start flipping through it on paper. I'm just kidding, I just use Control F. However, I find the section, and my first question, the letter of the law, you needed to have this very specific code in that code element, or in that code attribute. Done. One line of code change, easy, solve that problem. Maybe it occurred 100 times in the document, that's 100 things that passed. But if I can go back, notice there's no complaint, though, about the value being null. That null flavor is a null flavor meaning other, and that means actually I don't have a code for this. That's the source system saying, I don't know how to describe to you in computer understandable words that this person can't, or words isn't the right word, but this person can't feed themselves very well and needs help. So looking at the value element, CCDA spec says, okay, go use something from this value set. So as an implementer, I want to go see what does this look like? What should be in here? What are my options? So I'm going to go to this value set authority center. I'm going to pop in the OID that spec told me this is the value set you need to go look at. And boom, I have 6,000 options to choose from. This is fantastic. So again, as an implementer, I'm not a clinician. I can make a couple good effort guesses. So I'm going to look up feeding, I'm going to look up eating. And here I looked up feeding, and I have a couple that look like they could be what this should be describing. Should this be what's present in that actual code element? Is that what this is trying to describe? Or the value element, I should say. That's a bit of a question for me. Can I, as a consultant in the middle of this project, make these calls? Sometimes. Generally, though, I need to go back to the source and say, hey, okay, you're not sending us anything. We need this because, yes, we can see it in your narrative block, but that doesn't help with interoperability downstream. Other people are going to want this information too. I'm ingesting it, I'm passing it on. Can you code this? Sometimes the answer is, yeah, no problem. Not always, sometimes. Sometimes the answer is, no, we can't. In that case, we have two options. We can either, we can either have the, we can either enrich it ourselves using some third-party tools that are available out in the marketplace. We actually use them. There's some really strong ones out there that can actually use AI and apply it to the narrative block and say, okay, this particular form of needs assistance feeding themselves should be this code. That's great. But in some simple cases, we can just code it ourselves. Usually we can get something from the source or, a very simple use case. We can get some confidence, do a little research, and pin down what the code should be, map it ourselves. That's what's covered here. So we can modify the message in flight. We have solutions that do that, which is excellent for handling issues like this, as well as some transport issues. And then we have data quality as a service solutions, not just us. There's other folks out there, but they're out there that handle these kinds of enrichments for you. And I think that is the end of my slides. Thank
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you planning to take the test, for those that enjoy testing, validation, looking at XMLs, technical documentation, you know the difference between XML, XSLT, LOL. This is definitely the test for you. You can see lots of examples John just had when you're looking at some of the details in here. What Dee Dee, she mentioned my name. I'm Alan Vitale from Deloitte. I'll be sharing our experiences on how we went through the process. We just finished a product certification 4 or 5 months ago. I'm also joined by Suzanne Oliveri. Myself and her, we kind of co-project managed the process, her more from the PM, me more from the technical. So we'll be kind of also addressing, instead of the detail, we've gotten into the detail, I'm going to step it up a different level. Now, I wouldn't be true to Deloitte if I didn't give you the advisory on how do you actually pass the test. What are the tips and tips, techniques, and things that we found as we went through the process. So, a little bit of background. We are in a little bit of a unique position. We are an integrator, but we are a software development company, which is not so much you would normally know us for. We actually developed a product called Health Interactive, which is what we're depicting on the slide here. And I promise this is not going to be a sales pitch. On the left, we handle inputs. Our product, Health Interactive, handles inputs from lots of different source systems, not only EHRs, Epic and Cerner and all of the typical traditionals, the ancillaries, the labs and things like that. But we also have the ability to input information from some of the other things, the IoTs, the wearables and such like that, as well as some of the registries. But the product, the key part of the product that we were certifying is the write. We have lots of different destinations that we can send it, but the primary functionality which we actually by contract were requested to certify was the Health Information Exchange. So we are an integrator, but we developed a product, and that product we certified for one of our major clients that went out there. Okay, so I promised it wouldn't be so much. Now, unlike a typical Deloitte presentation, we only have 2 slides. 2 slides. But I'll try to drag this one out as much as I possibly can. When I was discussing this with the team, we were asked, what are some of the lessons? What did you go through as you were going through this process? What are the main areas that you really had some experiences with? So we broke it into 5 different pieces. We broke it into planning. So really the fundamentals are how do you get through this? How are you going to plan for it? How are you going to staff it? The requirements, the optional versus required. What was our experiences with that? Actually doing the testing, what buttons are you going to hit? So really getting into the process of that. And then how did we handle support and documentation? So first one, planning. We called out contracting and the certification type. Now, I think it was Matt started with the whole DRSA. Well, it wasn't so much DRSA on contracting that we had a question with. It was the contract itself we had to sign for Sequoia. The main point here is just because you want to do this doesn't mean it has to go through your legal. Our legal came up with all kinds of red marks on it. Nothing major, so don't feel so bad. But confidentiality was one. They had some markups. So the process, add to your process. If you think it's only going to take you 2-3 weeks to do this, we added almost a month just to get the contract signed. So first part was the contracting. What do we do with the contracting? Now another question, and I was just having a discussion with someone on the floor, was the certification type. There are 2 different types of certifications. There's a product, and then there's the participant. We, again, we're in a unique position. If I was an implementer, I might be helping someone with a participant testing because I'm just helping them use someone else's product. Because we actually have the product, we developed the product in-house, we did the product certification. There's a big difference between product and participant. Product, as far as the number of tests, cases you have to do, it's substantially more, and we'll get into a little bit of that. So you definitely have to decide, and it depends on what you're trying to go for. If you are someone just looking to get on the exchange and you're using someone else's product, you're going to do participant. It basically has smoke tests and not even so much the content tests, I don't believe. But if you are going for the product certification, which means you have software, you have to do all 52 some odd, or whatever it is now. I think it was 52 when we did it. 52 test cases and all the validations that go along with that. Okay, so next spot, staffing. How did we staff this? It might seem like a lot, but it wound up, and keep in mind that we have a team that developed the product, but then we also had another team which fell into a lot more of the consultancies. This wasn't our primary job. So we did a lot of part-times, but we wound up staffing with Susanna to do the overall PMing, myself as more the technical manager. We had the software developers. We had at least 2 of them. It was really 3, but part-time. And then we had at least 3 to 4 analysts just going through all of the test cases. So we basically staffed it up. It was about 7 or some odd people to actually get this thing accomplished. I will say we were probably the longest person to get certified. It took us about a year, but the actual testing of those cases, probably about a month. You know, when we actually started submitting the stuff and really getting into it, it was probably about a month or so. Okay, so testing requirements. So we got into a little bit of that when John was talking and when Dee Dee was talking. Every time, we have 52 things that you need to do. You have to go through this long checklist of 52 things plus the content tests. Of those 52 things, each one of those has XMLs that are tied to it. Remember that initial statement, you better like XML, style sheets, and everything else? Well, you need to know it because you have to know which of those are optionals, which ones are required. Okay, of those, we tended to be the vendor and led more towards doing the requireds. But, sorry to tell you that one.
That's why we
But we tended to do most requirements. The one thing that, once you go through each one of those tests, let's say you do the first test, you're doing a smoke test. When you do that smoke test, you run your test, you go into your application, you submit it, it does all its wonderful communications, and then you get basically a red light or a green light inside the testing tool. Now, one thing here was one of the other little tidbits that we had was, just because it said you failed didn't mean you failed. So we're bringing this up as a word of exceptions. Exceptions are not failures depending upon. So we had a big question on RSA versus X509, the security stuff, right? It turns out that after digging into some of the documentation that what we were sending was actually correct, but there was multiple options. So at that time, the testing tool didn't know how to handle it. So it was actually read, and through lots of emails and communications, we actually found out that we passed it. So tidbit number 2 on the testing requirements, exceptions aren't always a failure just because it's a red. And the third one, the content testing, again, we were part of the process, and a little commercial to Dee Dee, is we were the last organization to go through this process before they re-engineered and improved all the documentation. So everything that we're seeing is post the changes. As far as the content testing, it was more of a manual process. We generated a content document. We chose to do CCDAs, generated it from our application, and it was more of a manual process where we actually had to email it to the organization, and then there was some back and forth as far as did you pass, did you not pass. What we did find very helpful for that was actually the tool, John, if you read the URL, it was Gazelle Exchange at Sequoia. It took us a while. We went through a couple of different products to try to validate our CCDAs that actually passed their criteria, and then we wound up inadvertently finding it, which is now a better document. So the CCDAs, the Gazelle text at Sequoia. That definitely got us over the final hump that we had there. Okay, so the testing process. I know you're all waiting for this one. God, you're such a quiet group. I know it's a dry material, but we're trying to get through it here. Okay, training the tester. we did not know what we were expecting. So what did we do? We took the whole group and we said, okay, we're all doing it all together. We're doing it as one group. We picked one case, and we took that case. We just did it beginning to end. We figured out what did we need to send? What part of the application did we need to go in to trigger this? Who is going to generate the audit files? What tool are we going to use to look at the XML? What checks did we have to run? What validations? We actually have to open up those Excel documents. You actually have to open up the XML documents and find, this is where XPath, you better know XPath. You actually have to go into these XML documents and make sure the content is as expected. If you don't do that, the DIL, the test tool, will highlight it. It'll say, you're missing name in blah, blah, blah. So it will actually go through the 600 different spots that are in these XML documents and yell at you a little bit there. So the test the trainer was very key. We figured out what tools we needed, what we were going to use, how were we going to do it. And then after we finally made it through one, we said, okay, and then we took all the work, we divvied it up, we basically took the 52 cases, we broke it up, and spread that across all of our testers and analysts, and everybody just wound up pitching in for that. So train the trainer, train the tester, and some of the validation tools. We wound up doing this in 3 passes. We went through, and we went through all 52 cases. We did all validations against each one of them, figured out how to generate the audit files for each one of those, but we still didn't pass the first time. We went back, we had to make some tweaks, we had some changes we had to make, went through the whole thing again. We did not submit, and this is very key, here's another little tidbit. And when you're in the actual DIL and you're actually doing your certification, there's a little button there, which I think you should kind of elaborate a little bit. It says, save or submit. And what does save mean, or what does submit mean? Well, submit means it goes to them and then they grade you, so you really have to make a conscious decision not to hit that one button, because if you do, then it actually goes for grading. Just save it, you do all your tests, you save it, you look for the red, yellow, greens. Wound up doing 3 iterations, so it did not go perfectly the first time. We had errors, wound up doing a second time. Third time, we finally felt confident, then we submitted it. We did all of them, got all the greens with the red exceptions, submitted it, let it go, and they came back actually pretty quickly with our answer. So that was one of the better parts of the of the process. One thing to note: the tools. You are looking at XML documents. There's kind of no way around that. XML Spy, something like that, to actually view it and let your testers navigate the XMLs definitely worked out well. And for the CCDAs, the Gazelle, I mentioned this before, that definitely worked out very well because we actually tried some of our own validations with known popular schemas, validations for CCDs, and we still didn't really comply. So we definitely needed to use that, the Gazelle one. Okay, so lastly but not least important was support and documentation. So if you're very interested in reading technical documentation, and this is something you like to do when you're sitting on the beach in Aruba, this is definitely the place to be. They do have a lot of documentation. It is even more organized now. It was a little challenging to navigate all of the different documentation before, but there's definitely been improvements on that. Unfortunately, it happened after us. So we definitely wanted to cover support and documentation. We generally opened up tickets when we had a problem. It was not preferred to make a phone call. So we generally sent an email to Sequoia. At that time, it was actually Aegis for us. And we have an Aegis rep. Oh, he walked out. Communication was primarily with Aegis, emails, tickets, and they generally get back to us pretty quickly. When we did have final, pretty interesting conversations like the RSA, the security ones, then we wound up actually getting on a phone call. But generally speaking, communication was email and tickets. Our biggest question was the security test case. That was the one that was really holding us up, was that RSA X509. So wrapping this up, I told you to try to stretch out this one slide as much as I could. If you're not discouraged already, I do have good news for you. It is honestly speaking, it is manageable. You can do this. But just make sure that you have enough staff, you have enough time, that you put enough time into it, and then you factor in all the things such as, what tools are you going to use, your time to get through your legal process and all of your, contracting. Make sure you have enough people. And hopefully it goes, at least you can do it a little faster than us with our year there. So hopefully this helps, a little bit of tidbits, and thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, my turn with the clicker. So I'm here to represent the other part of the story. So we at VHE have been working with the data for at least a couple of years. We're looking at what comes out the other side of the tunnel, and we've had presentations with many of you to talk about the observations, and the responses were pretty much uniformly enthusiastic to hear about what you didn't know. We've worked with multiple vendors, partners, and working closer with eHealth Exchange and Sequoia on a national scope so that there's a single voice in the future. The goals, since most veterans have external partners to take care of them, the interoperability is key because, we go into this with the patient being the primary interest. It's the patient and clinician event, and that speaks to my background as a pharmacist, but we're all here for the patient. So the veteran care is improved, anybody's care is improved with more data, and we recognize the need for continuous data monitoring. So we started with the continuous surveillance of the HL7 products. We use a variety of advanced analytic tools. Over time, we've learned, switched, and did different analysis. So we're always advancing and pushing the envelope. And then communicating, we have to have the closed loop so that we communicate back to the source what we're finding out. And supporting the partner with actionable data items, the observations, and having a sustainment analysis so that, we're in this shoulder to shoulder to improve the data, again, focusing on the patient. So this is our improving value, that the constant recalibration. So when you learn something, you go on to another analysis. And reprioritization, I don't know if it's the speed of life, but it's as fast as we can get a new set of data tools out there to look at the data. What we learned most importantly last year was that we went from a single partner presentation of the observations. We found that sometimes we overwhelmed, sometimes the partner team was of varying composition to be able to take this kind of a deep analysis. And you can see it involves a lot more people. So this year our focus is at the vendor level. So fix one place and it rolls through and has a high impact on many partners. The tools at this point in time are the model-driven health tool, MDHT, creates a set of different tools we use. So our team includes both clinicians and analytic people. So we can look at the data differently, and then we come together and determine what the presentation will be. We use Altova, and we have a sophisticated de-identification process. So we hope to be able to provide with Sequoia and other places these production records, which are much different than a test record. And we use Excel, and in the future we hope to use Diameter Health to have continuous scoring of all records and surveillance. It's just a matter of approvals. It's not the tool itself, it's just the approval process is a challenge in the VA. We went from scoring less than 20 records on a partner to doing thousands of records. We usually take a month sampling, and about 12,000 records if we can get them from any single partner. And in the future, we'll be doing the batch and continuous. you don't need to know what's on here, except to realize that we focused on 6 domains and many different data elements within it. The focus now for VHE is we're not just going to display the data in CCDs to the clinician, but we're actually working on ingesting. So it's even more critical that we understand the data and what the source meant with that data element and with that status. So you can see this is where the inconsistencies become problematic even more to be able to actually ingest the data. The types of errors, missing entries, the incorrect values, and there's a subset that is creative placement of data, so that we find immunizations float around. They might be in medications, they might be in immunizations, and we've even found one vendor who uses the plan of care to put all the immunizations. So that's fine in a human readable context, looking at a style sheet for the clinician, but to ingest this data and to be able to have a single picture of the local data and the partner data, that's not going to work. We're not going to understand where that data is, how to use it. It often, in the wrong place, doesn't have any kind of a code system that we could hook onto and be able to use. So the content, the opportunities here are the implementation guide with the use cases and a content implementation guide. So I know they may be one document, but for me, they're 2 separate issues. The content one being, at our institution, we need to have this data element and it needs to use this. So you take the loose HL7 standard and you say, if I'm going to use it, I have to have this part of it, and it has to be in this format. So you're drilling down. And the interoperability strategy, it's not only for us to ingest it, but there'll be a scoring impact, there'll be a local reimbursement issue for you if the data's not right. So we try to pick actionable items that have to do with something that will help everyone. This is just a rough comparison of what we've found, and we have almost 200 partners that we are dealing with right now with a variety of vendors. So overall, you can see the EHRs is better for content and syntax than the HIEs. You can see in a slide like this, what we're finding is one vendor install is one vendor install, that they're able to configure or tweak differently. And the challenge between these two, you can see on the left, or you can't see, on the left upper side, that we were only able, out of 6,000 records, to use 2,000. The rest were duplicates, huge number of duplicates. Whereas on the other side, it was more reasonable that we were able to use 1,700 out of 26. So that's a lot of energy going back and forth with a lot of records for not much outcome, that the data-wise we aren't able to use. And we expect some duplication, but the one on the left, we would meet with them and say, you know, what do you know your pain points are that we're causing so many of these extra records to be shared? Now, when we meet with the vendor or the partner, we develop consensus next steps. So we're always enthusiastic. We're all out here curious, trying to present things as opportunities. You know, there's no judgment. We're here for the patient. So these are the kinds of, we go through the communication and what works for you, and we go through the analysis, and then we decide on some next steps together. So some of the challenges that we've identified, that there are critical data quality barriers of sorts, so the variability of the adherence to the standard, the perceived low ROI on data quality initiatives, the absence of these guides and the guides with constraints for your site, and the absence of including data quality in risk management programs. So the adherence to standards is as we all know, the inconsistency of the messages. And the flexibility, which is good on one hand, we all pay the piper on the other hand. And again, I agree with the local internal codes. They might work locally just fine, but they're of no use when we're trying to ingest it. So the implementation guides being available, perhaps think about the HFMEA, which in healthcare is used for an end-to-end process within a system. And you can do the same with the data flow, trying to figure out all the different points that might have a challenge. And the consideration of an onboarding probationary quarantine kind of phase, so that until there's a threshold of quality met, the data is brought in and quarantined while the data is getting better with the iterative back and forth. So we, think that's an opportunity. As far as the perceived low ROI, the concept that if the data is not populated, if it's incomplete, so we have partial data and can't use it, or that the code systems which pass in a testing scenario when you're getting certification, now when you're looking at 10,000 records for a month, you find that there is a trend for missing codes or the wrong code system. And, the data quality analytics requires significant resources. So, thanks to Dr. Donahue and Todd Turner, we have the data quality team pulled together to take the observations out and do things that smaller teams cannot do. So the opportunities start with defining the business needs succinctly. Think about ROI beyond money and think about it in clinician frustration and better patient care, establish multidisciplinary outcomes, and the data quality team doing these ROI efforts, which is a focus we have for the next year, to be able to say, it's worth the time back at the source to fix it one place, which helps a whole myriad of your downstream users. Because even locally, within a single vendor, if you've got a local code at Hospital 1, doesn't match the code locally at Hospital 2, and you can't do what you want even internally because you've got a local system. I harp on more implementation guides. It's just having that in front of you and building it so the constraint level is right. And then the concept of, if you're an HIE and you onboard a partner, to understand what their data quality process is internally, or at the HIE level, or at the enterprise, which level is doing the data quality before it goes out the door. Because we've talked to some big medical centers that have extensive programs, but they're so used to checking just within themselves, or we've never shared with the outside, or we've never looked at that many records. And the data risk management, to create a data risk management framework so that poor data quality poses a risk to an organization, but it's usually not part of risk management, or it's not part of the concept at the hospital that their data is a valuable resource and they should spend time working on improving that. So I think there's a big opportunity to include risk management. There's patient safety consequences and considerations that can be included, and to include risk mitigation planning. Thank you.
All right, thanks to our panelists. We're going to have a few minutes of Q&A. So while you're out there thinking, think about a question you'd like to ask the panelists. But as the moderator, I'll take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first one to get us started. But we do want to encourage, learning from these folks that have tested already. One of the questions that, and I did ask the panelists to provide questions to me, so I didn't put them just on the spot. But one of the questions that was sent to me was, how's the content testing program really going to improve data quality? So I'm going to open it up to my panelists and let them voluntarily answer that.
I'll voluntarily answer that. So, I don't know. I think an allegory might help. So, whenever we start a new integration or interoperability project, a lot of the time we get on that first phone call with the other side, quote unquote, and they say, okay, we ask, what kind of data are you going to be sending us? Oftentimes we get pulled in, we don't even know, it's HL7, CCD, what have you. And they just say, we send you a standard CCDA. And we chuckle. We just laugh because we all send a quote unquote standard CCDA. But no one sends a standard CCDA because no one's agreed on what that truly means. And what this content testing is trying to do is set that quote unquote standard CCDA and make it a reality. If everybody gets on the same page and we put things in the same place and require the same items and pull from the same code sets, interoperability just gets that much easier. We're all talking the same language. We're all talking English. We're not talking hieroglyphics. I like that in the previous talk, and I'm stealing that.
Anybody else want to contribute in anything? Or we want to open up for another one? All right. So anybody from the audience, would you like to answer a question? I think Jennifer has a microphone. She'll circulate, and that way everyone can hear anybody. Anybody? Any questions for this team? Yes, Paul.
Hi there. So a question would be from the vendor community themselves, how many of the vendors are actually submitting to do this testing, or is it the requirement for the individual participant to do this?
Oh, I'll take that one. So both. The testing program, content testing, is a requirement for participants that are in production today. So all of them have the 12 months that started February countdown till February 5th. Product vendors who are validated, and we now have 15 vendor products that are validated in total. They have to test, even just to maintain their validation. So new folks like Deloitte, who just came on and just went through testing, they had to do it up front. Any new folks coming in as they're onboarding, so new participants or new product vendors have to do it up front. But all those that were already in production have the 12 months to do it. Again, they have to try it. They don't have to pass. They have 18 months from their test date to work with the vendors as implementers, or the vendors to work with their code changes to make changes to fix the errors. Now, the tools give you errors and warnings. John mentioned the should a little while ago. It gives you a warning for the shoulds. Eventually, we may make shoulds shalls, which would then give you that error. We will work with lining our testing program to always work with the evolving requirements. For instance, the U.S. Core Data for Interoperability, U.S. CDI that's coming out. I'm seeing that that's probably going to be what's going to start raising the bar from there. But that's the requirement now. Everyone must test, and they don't have to pass, but they have 18 months to rectify the issues. Other questions? Over here, Marty?
Yes, so, Didi, as you just asked about the vendors and their time frame, what's the time frame for the participants to adopt, those mitigated, remediated, documents?
Same 18 months. We're hoping that they'll work with their vendors to help rectify that. Now, we do have some health information exchanges that say, I don't control my data. It comes from other sources. So we understand that that's part of the complexity here. You may have a vendor EHR that you have no control over as an HIE that you're getting data from. We hopefully will work with partners like the VA. We'll work directly with vendors to help mitigate some of those. Did that answer?
Yeah, and one follow-on, what's up next in the testing program?
What's up next in the
Yeah,
testing?
as far as the content testing, because this takes us to a certain level.
Yep.
There's more to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. I think that I'm going to hopefully be able to work with the VA to take not only just the requirements. If you think about what we're testing for content today, it's based on the specs. There is optionality. There are those shoulds. We need to start thinking about what are the real data elements that are going to make that clinical decision support really important. So some of those data classes, as I call them, the Sandy mentioned in her slide, the one blueprint part that had the data classes that were kind of a little hard to read, trying to maybe start looking at those and saying, okay, should we change those to errors if they're not doing things right? Also implementing things like the common white paper that was written by Commonwealth and Care Quality. So our next initiative, Care Quality, is looking at content testing as well, taking and some of that guidance or best practice, like clinical notes shall go for these sections here. You shall not send us medications unless they're new active medications, things like that. So continually raising the bar based on your input. So we are going to be dependent on all of you implementers to tell us how to improve your data quality, because we want to hold each other accountable, all right? We don't want to just say, well, only this section over here does it right and this section over here does it. We want everybody to hopefully get there together. Other questions? Oh, a lot over here. Sorry, Judd. And it's not easy to get across the room either.
Thanks. Someone earlier mentioned specialty-based CCDAs, and I was wondering if there's a tension from a standpoint of optionality between getting provider participation versus getting richer data.
Do one of our panelists want to attack that one?
So as far as that goes, especially with the clinician push to get the rich and robust clinical notes in there, this year we're going to do document types to try to understand the value, and again, bubble that up to say there's a big difference if you could send the specialty CCD because it goes to a particular direction. And, you know, we're looking to partner for ROI projects so that we can, you know, have that on both sides. And the VA also looks at their own data going out so that we do take both sides of that.
And just to jump in really quickly on that, we see this, or we spoke on this briefly. This content testing lays the groundwork for enabling or allowing or even requiring more different templates than just the continuity of care document, CCD. Because today, most people still just do the CCD. There's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of potential that's going untapped because of that.
Next question?
Yeah, we've had some confusion about this, but from a participant perspective, what are the costs for the smoke testing?
So think of this, okay, content testing is one thing, and that's just to make sure everybody's crystal clear. Content testing is free. To all participants, product vendors, there is no charge for content testing. Transport testing, however, there are still charges. So we have not gone up since our inception of the testing program in 2012. The smoke tests are still $11,000 for those organizations that must retest. Reminder to participants in the contracts that we have for you guys, you're supposed to retest every 3 years. That's product vendors and participants, because we do expect you to upgrade your technologies probably over a few years. If we find that you've not updated it, you don't have to test. But the smoke test, there's an $11,000 charge. For the security test, there's an $8,000 charge. There's no charge for the content testing. That's ongoing. And then once you access the tools, you have access to those tools for that 3 years of your contract. So if you want to continually test internally your own product as it's upgraded and so forth, we can work with you on that. Does that help?
Question over here, and just a quick footnote. Actually, to reinforce something Dee Dee mentioned, our content tests or our testing fees have actually gone down over time. And we're able to do that because we're sharing the efficiency of all of us collaborating together on trying to solve some problems instead of it being one-offs for all of us.
Kevin Larson from CMS. Curious if you looked at some of the content testing from quality measure reporting. So the QRDA is a CCDA template, and we mandate it at CMS, and there's a robust testing infrastructure and really much more tightly constrained requirements for clinical quality data with code sets required for certification and submission. So, and the NCQA, for example, recently has a gigantic, robust testing infrastructure. So I'm just wondering if there's crossover in that content testing to be sure that we're not doing two completely separate content testing approaches.
Very wonderful question. So yes, you mentioned NCQA, who's been accredited by ONC to do, quality measure testing and holding those vendors accountable. Good news is the tooling we have can do QRDA. QRDA for quality measures is based on the same format the CCDA is. So our tool could do that. We've not ventured into that realm yet, but for instance, one of the implementation guides that you guys have in CMS for end-stage renal disease reporting, there's quality measures associated with that as well. We could start including that based on your implementation guide. So there's things like that that are open. I've had some discussions with the American College of Cardiology, who have their own quality measures that they've worked with to get adopted. All these things can be possible. What I've been doing right now up front is working with HL7 to make sure that the CDA management group, which Brett Marquardt, I don't know if he's, yeah, there's Brett. He's one of the co-chairs for the CDA management work group. They're looking at making sure some of the quality data metrics and then the regular, the regular CCDA data, as well as fire resources, make sure that there's some cross collaboration around the value sets that are used and things like that. So that's what we're doing right now, but if you have suggestions on other ways to improve it, we're always open, so please let us know.